Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today takes us into the heart of Tokyo, focusing on a single, fascinating neighborhood that just embodies contradiction. Kameido.
It really does.
It's a place where, the most sacred aspects of Japanese tradition clash daily with some of the most profane human desires.
That's right. When you visit Kameido today, you are likely drawn to the breathtaking Kameido Tenjin Shrine. It's famous for its wisteria, its connection to Sugawara no Mikunaga, the deity of learning.
Oh, flower tenjin.
Exactly. But the reports we've been digging into confirm that immediately behind this revered sanctuary of academics and beauty lay one of Tokyo's most massive and notorious pleasure quarters.
And it had this incredible nickname, Kameido Yuenchi.
Kameido Yuenchi, the adult amusement park.
The adult amusement park, right behind a shrine dedicated to learning. I mean, that tension is our central focus. We have a stack of incredibly detailed reports from urban archaeologists, history enthusiasts, people who have meticulously pieced together the life cycle of this district.
Yeah, and these sources trace its beginnings from, a simple Edo-era pilgrimage stop to a major metropolitan hub of private prostitution, and then ultimately its decline and almost complete physical erasure in the modern era.
So our goal is to connect these dramatic historical shifts for you. We're tracking how seismic events, both natural and man-made, the Kanto earthquake, the devastating air raids, didn't just destroy buildings.
No, they fundamentally reshaped the social geography of this area. And we're going to spend a good amount of time focusing on that post-war chapter, how this quarter was resurrected, transforming into one of Tokyo's police-designated Akasen districts, operating right up until the anti-prostitution law ended that specific era in 1958.
So we're peeling back the layers of history hidden within these, what are now quiet residential streets. We're seeking out the subtle, almost invisible physical clues that hint at the massive scale of what was once here.
It's an exercise in historical retrieval, really.
It is. It's about ensuring that this important chapter in Tokyo's social history, the story of Kameido Yuenchi, isn't lost to the city's relentless scrap and build cycles. Okay, so let's unpack this historical geography. We've established that the Kameido Tenjin Shrine, with its iconic red drum bridges and the wisteria, is the anchor point. Why was its presence so critical to the rise of this pleasure quarter immediately behind it?
Well, the shrine's presence created the fundamental economic driver, traffic. I mean, for centuries, going to the shrine visit was a primary form of mass recreation.
Right, like tourism today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So where thousands of people, mostly men traveling from surrounding areas, gathered for tourism or pilgrimage, a supporting economy naturally arises.
They need places to eat, drink, sleep.
And crucially, places for entertainment. The geography meant that as soon as visitors crossed that sacred threshold, they were immediately in an area that was just ripe for commerce, which, in the context of Edo and Meiji Japan, inevitably led to the establishment of these unofficial pleasure quarters.
And the most evocative term for this entire quarter is that nickname, Kameido Yuenchi, the amusement park.
Yes, Kameido Yuenchi per se. This was the colloquial, the widely understood term for the entire complex of businesses dedicated to adult entertainment. It was playful, It hinted at a place where men could fulfill various desires.
So it was a day out. You'd combine your piety at the shrine with pleasure right afterwards.
That's the idea. And this nickname, it encompassed everything. It blurred the lines between the formal and the informal areas.
Now, the sources make it clear that the district was never homogeneous. We have the nickname, Yuenchi, which covered the whole thing. But then we have two distinct formal designations we need to define for you, the Sanguchi and the later Akasen. Let's start with that formal Meiji designation.
Okay, so the Meiji government, realizing the tax and control potential here, formalized part of this bustling economy in 1905, Meiji 38. They designated it a Sanguchi, which literally means three trades area.
And it had an official name.
It did, Jodo Karyugai, or the Eastern Castle Flower Town.
What exactly were those three trades? Because this gives us a huge clue about the intended clientele, the sort of status of this formalized zone.
Right. So the three trades represented high-class Japanese entertainment and hospitality. First, you had the geisha okiya, which were the houses that managed and dispatched geisha.
Okay.
Second, kappu, which is high-class cuisine or restaurants, often race day, specializing in really sophisticated dining and drinking. And third, you had makiai, these specialized waiting houses where patrons would meet their geisha or host private parties and banquets.
So on paper, this was a cultural, high-status entertainment zone. It required official sanctions, significant capital to operate.
Very much so.
So on one side of the street, you had this elegant, sanctioned flower town, catering to a wealthier or middle-class patron. But that Yuanchi nickname suggests something much broader, something that encompasses a different kind of commerce. How did the shishikutsu, the private prostitution quarter, fit in?
It fit right alongside it, and sometimes, right within the formal area. The sengyuchi was geographically adjacent to or slightly overlapping with a sprawling network of meishuya.
And those are the fronts for private prostitution.
Exactly. They were the shishu. So the flower town existed officially, but the massive scale of the private prostitution, especially after a certain key historical event we'll get into, is what truly defined the area as the yuanshi. This mixture of sanctioned elegance and widespread, private, much cheaper sex created that explosive reputation.
That economic and social dichotomy is critical, isn't it?
Yeah.
The official geisha district catered to maybe a merchant or business class.
Right.
While the private prostitution zone likely targeted that massive working population surrounding Kameido.
Exactly. And the sources confirm the class difference was stark. It created two economic models running in parallel. The official flower town required patrons with disposable income for expensive banquets for geisha services.
But the
meishiya, often disguised as simple inns or sake shops, offered quick, transactional, and much, much cheaper services. They were accessible to the nearby factory workers. This ability to cater to both the elite and the laboring class, that's what ensured the quarter's immense sustained success.
Okay, now let's talk about the post-war terms, the Akasen and Saisen, because the focus of our deep dive today specifically touches upon this Akasen era behind Kameido Tenjin, what happened after 1945 to create this distinction.
Right. So after the catastrophic destruction of the war and with the Allied occupation in place, the Japanese police were eventually tasked with managing prostitution until the law changed in 1958. They needed to draw administrative boundaries.
Literally drawing lines on a map.
Literally. Akasen, the red line, referred to areas that the police officially recognized and tacitly regulated for businesses engaging in special services, often in places disguised as cafes or special restaurants. These were the police-sanctioned zones drawn with a red line.
And what about the areas operating outside that official sanction?
Those were the Saisen, the blue line. These were non-designated areas, often springing up in neighboring towns or overlooked corners. They operated illegally, without the specific police oversight that defined the Akasen.
And Kameido became an Akasen district.
Yes. After the war, when the district was rebuilt, Kameido successfully lobbied, or was designated, to become one of the official Akasen districts. It was continuing its centuries-long tradition as a recognized pleasure quarter, even if that post-war iteration was dramatically scaled down compared to its pre-war zenith.
It's fascinating how the terminology reflects a shift in control. Pre-war, you have the loose, popular nickname yuanchi, alongside the official, high-culture sanjichi. Post-war, it becomes the controlled, regulated, but still legally ambiguous Akasen.
It shows a society constantly trying to manage, if not outright suppress, this ancient trade.
And that ambiguity is what makes Kameido's history so rich.
Yeah.
It was always a blend of high and low, legal and gray zone, all anchored by the thousands of annual pilgrims who kept the traffic flowing right through the middle of the pleasure district.
So let's delve deeper into that organic growth, starting back in the Edo period. We know that Yoshiwara was the official, walled-off pleasure quarter of the shogunate. Why did districts like Kameido, these so-called okabasho, spontaneously arise?
Good question. What made them necessary?
The existence of okabasho, or hill locations, places outside the official zones, was really an economic necessity and a matter of convenience. Yoshiwara was remote, it was expensive, and it required a significant time commitment for travel and service.
So for the average guy in Edo, particularly laborers or those who lived on the eastern side of the Sumida River, a trip to Yoshiwara was impractical for a quick visit.
Precisely. The demand for accessible, more casual entertainment created the supply in the form of these unofficial areas, and Kameido was a natural fit. It had that persistent stream of pilgrims and tourists.
So how did it start?
Well, initially, the chaya, the simple tea houses and rest stops for pilgrims, began to offer more than just tea and rice cakes. They introduced waitresses, sometimes known as meshamoriana, or rice-serving women who began offering companionship and eventually sex.
It was a very gradual evolution then.
Extremely gradual, driven entirely by local demand and the lack of accessible alternatives.
So this informal economy existed for centuries.
Yeah.
But by the Meiji Restoration, Japan was modernizing, and the government sought to control, regulate, and tax everything. This leads us to that formal designation in 1905 establishing the Joto Karyuga.
And the formalization wasn't just about taxation. It was also about urban organization, control of public health and morality, especially in the context of a rapidly industrializing city. Designating a sanyuchi meant the government could concentrate high-end business activity while simultaneously separating it, at least on paper, from the widespread illicit private prostitution that already existed.
Can we spend a moment visualizing the scale of this formal flower town? The sources provided some specific numbers for the early Showa era.
Absolutely. The scale was substantial. By the early Showa period, even before the big boom we'll discuss next, the formal flower town already boasted 89 geisha houses.
89? That's a lot.
It is. And to support these houses, there were 236 registered geisha working here. Think of that as a small, specialized, highly trained workforce.
Wow.
Furthermore, the supporting infrastructure included 11 high-class reite, the restaurants, and 79 makiai, or waiting houses.
79 waiting houses. That's a huge economic engine. It suggests sophisticated, entertaining business deals, the maintenance of a high cultural facade.
It does. A geisha is an artist, and the rishite were centers of culinary excellence. This infrastructure was designed to entertain military officers, politicians, and successful businessmen. The existence of 79 waiting houses underscores that the primary business model was private banqueting and meeting, not just, quick stops.
It established Kameido as a destination for serious, expensive entertainment east of the river.
Exactly.
Yet even within this formalized structure, the lines remain blurry. How did the practice of selling spring operate within the geisha houses, complicating the official narrative?
Well, the reality of economics often trumped the ideal of artistry. While geisha were officially entertainers, the sources note that many, if not most, engaged in baishin, or prostitution.
Euphemistically termed selling spring.
Right. This happened either through arrangements made directly with the makiai or through the patrons. This blurring meant that even in the high-end sangyuchi, sexual services were available, making the whole area high and low function as a unified pleasure zone.
This complexity must have made the nickname yuenchi feel extremely apt. It wasn't one thing, it was a total package.
Precisely. And this is where the meishia comes back into the picture. They weren't part of the formal three trades, but they were the crucial link to the working class. These were pseudo-sake shops or inns, sometimes operating in slightly shabbier buildings right next to the elegant rishite. They provided a lower barrier to entry,
ensuring that Kameido catered to the entire social spectrum.
Exactly. The foundation was set. A high-traffic area, a formalized high-end sector, and a booming, accessible private prostitution sector. All it needed was a catalyst for explosive growth.
And that catalyst was one of the greatest disasters in modern Japanese history. The Kanto Great Earthquake of 1923. It's fascinating and deeply ironic that a seismic catastrophe created the conditions for Kameido's biggest boom.
The Kanto earthquake, or Taisho 12, fundamentally rewired Tokyo's social geography. It was a massive, unintended urban planning intervention. To understand why Kameido exploded, you have to look west, across the Sumida River to Asakusa.
Asakusa was the traditional heart of popular entertainment, wasn't it?
Absolutely. It was the epicenter of popular culture, known for theaters, cinemas, and, relevantly, a vast private prostitution district centered beneath the famous Ryunkaku, the 12-story tower.
Japan's first building with an elevator.
That's the one. And this district was packed shoulder to shoulder with Mishuya. When the quake and the ensuing fires decimated Asakusa, that entire massive operation was wiped out.
And city authorities, using the disaster as an opportunity, made a specific policy decision regarding that area's future.
They did. They prohibited the rebuilding of Mishuya in the destroyed areas of Asakusa. This decision was a confluence of factors: a desire for moral reform, attempts at modern urban planning to create wider, fire-resistant streets, and a general impulse to clean up the center of the city post-disaster.
So you have thousands of displaced operators and women forbidden from returning to their traditional lucrative spots in Asakusa. They had to go somewhere fast.
And they poured into locations where the infrastructure, the regulatory environment, and the demand already existed, but that were geographically outside the immediate focus of strict central Tokyo redevelopment.
And the two big recipients were?
The two primary recipients of this enormous human and business migration were Kameido Yuenchi and Tamanoi.
The sources emphasize that this influx of displaced business operators transformed Kameido Yuenchi overnight into a shishikutsu of unparalleled scale, rivaling Tamanoi, which of course became famous through literature.
It was an immediate, overwhelming growth spurt. The previously established Mashuya in Kameido suddenly had an endless supply of experienced operators and capital from Asakusa seeking refuge. The result was a district that, at its absolute pre-war zenith, is estimated by sources to have housed up to 2,000 private prostitutes.
2,000. That's an astonishing figure. It makes Kameido Yuanchi not just a footnote, but one of the major centers of desire in the entire Taisho and early Showa eras. It ceased being just an okabasho and became a full-fledged, sprawling city within a city.
That level of concentration requires immense sustained demand. And that leads us to the critical sociological point, the clientele. Kameido, unlike some central districts, was located in the industrial belt of East Tokyo. The patrons were not primarily the high-end geisha clients.
They were the factory workers.
Overwhelmingly, the young male workforce of the surrounding factories.
Can you elaborate on the industrial environment of the area at that time? Who were these customers?
I mean, they were the engine of modern Japan. Kameido was surrounded by massive industrial sites. You have to think of the enormous Hitachi factories, the Tokyo muslin spinning mills, which employed thousands of workers, and the renowned Seiko watch factories.
So these were young, working-class men, often living in company dormitories, working grueling hours, with limited entertainment options.
And specific emotional and physical needs.
So the district catered to a continuous stream of men coming off shift, looking for quick relief and companionship. What does that tell us about the architecture and the atmosphere compared to the formalized Sanjuchi?
It speaks to efficiency and volume. While the geisha district had elaborate reishite and required bookings, the Mashuya architecture focused on creating quick access and discreet passage. These were often standardized, simple inns or storefronts designed for rapid turnover.
And the atmosphere.
The atmosphere was likely bustling, loud, fueled by cheapsake, and defined by the contrast between the grime of the surrounding factories and the desperate glamour of the pleasure quarter.
The sources mentioned the streetcar accessibility, specifically the Yanagishima station. Why was that transportation link so vital?
The Tokyo streetcar, the Toden network, it was the lifeblood of working-class mobility. It meant that a factory worker from slightly further afield could easily jump on the streetcar, disembark at Yanagishima, visit the Yunji, and return to his dormitory relatively quickly.
So without the streetcar.
If the district wasn't accessible to the working class via public transit, it could never have supported 2,000 women. The transportation infrastructure was essential to maintaining this enormous scale.
It's a powerful illustration of how industrialization and social commerce intersect. The factory chimneys provided the clientele, the earthquake provided the mass migration of businesses, and the streetcar provided the conduit. This period, from 1923 to 1945, was Kameido Yuanchi's pre-war zenith.
A period of intense, almost legendary activity.
It was the height of its notoriety. This is the moment when Kameido truly earned the nickname Adult Amusement Park, becoming arguably the most massive and accessible private pleasure quarter in eastern Tokyo.
But that thriving, massive quarter, born from one disaster, was ultimately erased by another. The pivot point here is the Tokyo Great Air Raid of March 10th, 1945.
It was total obliteration, wasn't it?
Complete. The firebombing campaign targeted the heavily populated wooden residential and industrial areas of East Tokyo, and Kameido was right in the center of that destruction. The entire quarter, the Sanguchi, the Mashuya, all of it was simply wiped off the map.
We have to pause and reflect on that scale of loss. An economy supporting 2,000 workers and hundreds of supporting businesses just vanished in a single night.
The geographical and human destruction was absolute. And what's key is that many operators who had survived the 1923 relocation and the subsequent war years decided enough was enough. The sources note that a significant number moved permanently to new emerging areas that were less destroyed or further out.
Places like Tatishi and Koiwa.
Exactly.
So the community fragmented. But the demand remained, and the history of the location, immediately behind the famous shrine, still held commercial value. How did Kameido Yuanchi begin its revival?
It was a slow, painful process of rebuilding on a much smaller scale. The initial revival was often disorganized. But eventually, with police regulation returning, the quarter was formally designated as an official Akasen, or Red Line district.
And this post-war period, from roughly 1947 until 1958, is the specific Akasen era behind Kameido Tenjin that our sources focus on.
Right, and this is a crucial distinction for you to understand. We're moving from the massive, sprawling, private, pre-war Yunchi to the smaller, police-regulated post-war Akasen.
And the atmosphere changed completely.
It did. The post-war Akasen in Kameido was marked by a distinct decline in scale, in vibrancy, and notoriety. The grand, almost mythical nature of the pre-war adult amusement park was gone, replaced by something much more pragmatic and, frankly, depressing.
The sources use some very specific, evocative language to describe this post-war environment. They suggest it was disappointing even to contemporaries.
They do. They describe it as gloomy and mundane. If you were a nostalgic patron who remembered the chaotic energy and massive scale of the 1930s, the post-war Akasen version would have been a profound disappointment.
And it was still serving the industrial areas.
It was. Sources note the glim reality that it was nicknamed the red line where you can see the chimneys. It was functional, but it lacked the sheer density and cultural status it once held. It was joyless.
Why was the decline so pronounced in Kameido compared to perhaps other areas that survived the war?
Well, several reasons. First, the total destruction meant they were starting from zero, unlike areas that had partial structures remaining. Second, the dispersal of the experienced operators to Tatishi and Koiwa siphoned off key talent and capital.
And the regulation itself played a part.
For sure. The nature of police regulation under the Akasen system often imposed restrictions on size and operation that curbed the sort of organic, explosive growth seen after the Kanto earthquake. It was a managed, fading enterprise.
So this smaller, gloomier Akasen district operated under police sanction until the end of that specific era.
That's right. The designation lasted until the anti-prostitution law, the Baishin Bushiho, was implemented nationwide in 1958. This legislation legally abolished the public, sanctioned sale of sex, effectively ending the Akasen and Saizen districts as they were known.
So Kameido's history as a police-recognized pleasure quarter came to a legal conclusion then.
It did. But interestingly, the Geisha district, the original Sanguchi we discussed, survived the Akasen closure.
How did that happen?
That formalized high-end sector, the Jodo Karidai, the Geisha and Rishite, had remarkable longevity. Since its function was nominally cultural and culinary, it wasn't immediately shuttered by the 1958 law. It continued to operate, albeit struggling, for decades longer.
Reportedly until the Heisei era, post-1989.
Right. But the sources confirm that even this formal union eventually disbanded due to economic pressure, particularly after the collapse of the bubble economy decimated demand for high-end corporate entertaining.
So the pleasure history of Kameido stretches over 3 distinct centuries. Informal Edo, massive pre-war boom and cultural zenith, and then the slow, painful decline of the post-war Akasen, and the final fade-out of the Geisha district.
A truly multi-layered history, culminating in a neighborhood that has spent the last few decades actively trying to forget what it once was.
This brings us to the present. We have this incredible narrative of destruction and rebirth, but what does the modern neighborhood look like? And how challenging is it to find physical evidence of a place that was built, destroyed, and rebuilt so many times?
It is the definition of urban archaeology in fast forward. Today, the area behind the Tenjin Shrine is overwhelmingly a quiet, dense residential neighborhood defined by modern apartments and small homes. The Japanese cycle of scrap and build rapid demolition and rebuilding means that historical evidence,
Especially of structures linked to a sensitive history like the Akasen,
is extremely rare. You're essentially looking for ghosts in the infrastructure.
Let's start with the most robust survivor then, the structure that remains from the formal Sangichi.
Okay, the most significant structural remnant is the former Kenban art. This was the administrative hub, the geisha agency or union office for the Jodo Karigai. It's where the geisha registered, took lessons, and where their business was dispatched from.
The nerve center of the formal flower town.
It was, and its current role provides a fascinating contrast to its history.
It's the local community center now.
It is, the Kameido Tenjin Kaikan. This repurposing is common, but if you examine the building, you can see historical weight. The sources note its distinctive, heavy roof structure and general solidity qualities that hint at its earlier, more formal role, standing out slightly from the modern residential architecture around it.
Now let's discuss the lost architecture, specifically of the post-war Akasen era that we've been spotlighting. The cafes, or special restaurants, had a particular look, didn't they?
They did. Akasen buildings were often designed with a specific, stylish flair intended to draw patrons and convey a sense of modern, sometimes illicit glamour. They often featured design elements borrowed from early 20th century Western architecture. Arched windows, rounded corners, decorative ceramic tiles, that kind of thing.
They were meant to look like trendy cafes or bars.
Exactly.
Was any of that classic, distinctive Akasen architecture preserved in Kameido the way it was in some other smaller districts?
Sadly, this is where the scrap and build cycle delivered its harshest blow to Kameido's memory. The reports confirm that almost no genuine Akasen cafe architecture remained. Historians had identified one building, featuring those arch windows and that distinctive tiled exterior, as the last known example in the entire district.
And what's the status of that last building?
It has recently been torn down.
Oh, that's a real shame, the last one.
The last one. The site is now a vacant lot awaiting new residential construction. This just highlights the precariousness of Tokyo's history. The final physical link to the architecture of the post-war Akasen period is gone.
It reinforces this sense of Kameido being a forgotten history, unlike districts like Harunomachi, where preservation has been more successful. So if the buildings are gone, then the remaining traces must be incredibly subtle. We're talking about true accidental archaeology here.
Yes, we have to look to things that are difficult or expensive to change, like public infrastructure and immovable monuments. One of the most fascinating subtle clues is found high up on a side street.
The utility pole clue.
Exactly. On a utility pole tag, likely near where the pre-war quarter was most concentrated, you can still find the remnant word yuan-shi.
And that shi means a branch or distribution point.
Right. It is a direct infrastructural reference to the old yuan-shi nickname that somehow survived multiple generations of utility maintenance. That administrative name, preserved on a piece of public property, is a powerful historical footnote.
It's the city's subconscious memory etched onto metal. But the most emotionally resonant piece of evidence, perhaps, is found back at a shrine nearby.
At the Kameido Tenjin Shrine, we find the most significant, intentional historical markers. If you examine the tamagaki, the stone fences surrounding the sacred grounds, you find evidence that the old entertainment bodies donated to the shrine, which was a common practice to gain legitimacy and status.
What inscriptions are preserved there?
The stone fences explicitly list the names of the organizing bodies that contributed to the shrine's upkeep. You can clearly find Jodo-san Gatumiai, the Flower Town Union, but most remarkably, on another fence panel, the nickname of the private prostitution district is preserved, Yenchi.
That is profound irony. A name synonymous with illicit, ephemeral desire, preserved for eternity in sacred, immovable stone, immediately adjacent to a shrine dedicated to the goddess of the sun.
It is the ultimate acknowledgement of the area's double life. The shrine accepted the donations, immortalizing the source of wealth, even if that source was the adult amusement park itself. It is a silent dialogue between the sacred and the profane that really defines Kameido's history.
Before we transition to our final thoughts, let's briefly acknowledge those unique, long-standing businesses that lend a certain nostalgic texture to the area, even if they aren't direct Akasen remnants.
They act as historical anchors. They give you a sensory impression of the early Showa atmosphere. We have the soba shops, like Nakanochaya Soba, known for its distinct, multi-story, augmented architecture.
It suggests a history of repeated adaptation and expansion.
Right. And Kameido Yabusoba, though temporarily closed, is another stylish example. The concentration of these quality soba houses is directly linked to the need of the geisha district for convenient, high-quality catering.
And the storefronts that feel like time capsules.
Like Suzuki Pharmacy, its facade is just charmingly nostalgic, selling retro cosmetic brands like Club Hormone Cream and displaying old signage like the classic Gokiburi Hoi Hoi bug catcher sign. You can easily imagine the working women and geisha of the past visiting this exact shop for their needs.
And there's a barbershop, too.
Yes, the Nagumo Barbershop, which, though it opened just after the Akasen closed in 1959, captures the residual architectural style of the area. Its stylized stone walls, its green window frames. It gives a subtle nod to the vanished cafe glamour.
These small details, from the barbershop's window frames to the utility pole tag, are all that's left of an immense, complicated history.
So if we connect all these threads to the broader picture of Tokyo's social evolution, Kameido Yuenchi stands as a potent case study. It wasn't defined by tradition, but by crisis. Its massive scale was the unintended consequence of the 1923 Kanto earthquake, which displaced thousands of businesses from Asakusa.
And it was totally erased by the 1945 air raids.
Completely. Then it was revived briefly as a smaller, sanctioned post-war Akasen district right behind the Shrine of Learning, before the law finally ended that chapter in 1958.
What stands out to me is how rapidly a commercial district of such profound size supporting thousands of people can be physically erased. We just walk the streets in our minds, searching for the physical markers, only to find the last example of its defining Akasen architecture was recently demolished.
Yeah.
The history here is fleeting. It survives only in the administrative ghosts of a utility pole and the silent inscriptions on a shrine's stone fence.
It reveals a profound truth about modern Tokyo. The city prioritizes the future over preserving difficult or complex aspects of its past. The pace of scrap and build means that social history, especially the history of the working class and marginalized women, often disappears first, leaving behind only quiet residential streets that tell no tales unless you know exactly where to look.
This leads us back to that comparison we noted earlier. The sources confirm that pre-war Kameido Yuenchi was equivalent in scale and importance to its contemporary Tamani. Yet Tamanoi was immortalized in classic Japanese literature. Nagai Kafu chose it as the setting for Bukuju Kiten, a strange tale from east of the river. That choice ensured its name and atmosphere live forever in the cultural memory of Japan.
And this raises an important provocative question. Why did Kameido, despite its size and profound history, become comparatively forgotten in the wider cultural narrative? While Tamanoi's labyrinthine nature may have appealed more to a writer like Kafu, Kameido's history, its direct, bold adjacency to the sacred shrine, its deep industrial connections, was equally dramatic.
So its obscurity suggests a complex cultural choice.
I think so. A choice about which pasts a city chooses to honor and which it chooses to silence.
What does the act of physically walking these quiet, anonymous modern streets tell us about how a city paves over its inconvenient truths? If you find yourself visiting Kameido, perhaps for the beautiful wisteria at the Tenjin Shrine, remember the scale of the adult amusement park that operated just steps away. But always remember you are in a quiet, modern residential community now, and respect the privacy of the people who call this historically layered ground home.
The ghosts of Kameido Yuenchi are quiet, but the diligent eye can still read their story in the stone and on the fading signs of infrastructure.
That's all for this deep dive into the hidden history of Kameido. Thank you for joining us.